What's going on, family? This is Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I'm going to continue with Iron Mike Tyson's career. Now, Mike Tyson had won the WBC Heavyweight Championship belt from Trevor Berbick in Nevada. I was at that fight, and Mike Tyson was now scheduled to face Bone Crusher Smith. I'm going to explain to you how that even happened. But Mike Tyson had owed Carl the Truth Williams an opportunity. Because Carl the Truth Williams was ranked number 10 in 1986, Mike Tyson was ranked number 20. And Carl the Truth Williams should have gotten a shot. And the reason why Carl the Truth Williams didn't get a shot with Mike Tyson, I was at the fight June 21st, 1987. It was at the Resort International in Atlantic City for the vacant USBA Heavyweight Championship belt. And he was fighting Smoking Burt Cooper. Now in that corner, you had Joe Frazier, who had taught Smoking Burt Cooper how to fight his style. Burt Cooper was 21 years old at that time. And the referee was Randy Newman. I knew him personally. He lived in Willingboro, New Jersey, and we had conversations about that. Now, one of the judges was Rocky Castellani. He was a former middleweight contender. He had faced Sugar Ray Robinson and others, Gene Foreman. Very good middleweight during those years. But Carl the Truth Williams was 27 years old, and Burt Cooper was 21. So what happened, Carl the Truth Williams was in the ring with Burt Cooper. Excuse me. And Burt Cooper's only loss at that time was to Reggie Gross. Mike Tyson knocked out Reggie Gross in 1986, was on the undercard of Edwin O. Chapo Rosario and Hector Macho Camacho. I was at that fight. I was probably second row of that fight. And that was a very, very good exhibition by Mike Tyson with Reggie Gross. Well, Burt Cooper had lost to Reggie Gross. So he had one loss, and Carl the Truth Williams had two losses. He lost to Weaver and he lost to Larry Holmes. And this is all my memory, I'm just trying to remember this stuff. And I can remember that Burt Cooper's eardrum got busted with a beautiful jab of Carl the Truth Williams. And they were trying to use Burt Cooper as a measuring stick at that point as to Mike Tyson. How would he do against taller fighters? And so when that happened to Burt Cooper, because he had fought Willie DeWitt. Willie DeWitt in 1984 was a very good Canadian heavyweight who was in those Olympic Games. And when Burt Cooper had defeated Willie DeWitt, I believe it was the second round knockout, that opened up a lot of eyes in the boxing industry. And they wanted to try and measure, because they were trying to get a fight between Burt Cooper and Mike Tyson. So they were trying to use Burt Cooper as a measuring stick as to how Mike Tyson would do against taller fighters. And that fight went on notice between Carl the Truth Williams and Smoking Burt Cooper. And that kind of did Carl the Truth Williams in, because Mike Tyson had sparred with Carl the Truth Williams when he was 16 years old. And although Mike Tyson held his own, Carl the Truth Williams gave Mike Tyson the business. And most sparring partners had to go up to Catskills. Mike Tyson had to go over to Yonkers Recreation Center. And that was, that was the end for Carl the Truth Williams, really, because he was, how would you say, he was better than his own good, if that makes any sense. He fought from 1982 to 1997. And he was born November 11th, 1959, in Belle Glade, Florida, I believe it was. He was 6'4". He had 85-inch reach, very powerful. He was in a ring with Larry Holmes. And most people thought that Larry Holmes lost that fight with Carl the Truth Williams. So Mike Tyson would never give Carl the Truth Williams a shot at that point in his career. He eventually did and got him out of there in one round. But early in his career, he wouldn't take that chance with Carl the Truth Williams. So right now, Mike Tyson is in the ring with Bone Crusher Smith. Mike Tyson was coming on at this time. Now, I want to show you something before we look at Bone Crusher Smith and Mike Tyson. I was at every last one of these fights except for the one in Houston with Eddie Richardson. I didn't see that fight live, but I saw every last one of these other fights live. And what was so interesting, I had to travel to go to these fights, and they were all 1 rounds and 2 round, 3 round, 4 round knockouts. Majority 1 round. And I was at the debut of Mike Tyson when he fought Hector Mercedes. It was March 6, 1985. But I just wanted to show you that. I was at all those fights, I was at a lot more of his fights, but every last one of these guys, except for Eddie Richardson, that was in Houston. Now here you have Mike Tyson and James Bone Crusher Smith. So let's take a look at that fight. Before we do that, let me set this up by telling you this. How James Bone Crusher Smith even got that fight. I remember Bone Crusher Smith sparring with Pinklin Thomas in Times Square boxing ring. And I was on my way up to the stairs to go into that gym. And you had a fighter by the name of Bobby Joe Young. He defeated Aaron the Hawk Pryor. And I was talking to him, and on my way up, had I not spoken to him, I'd have saw what happened. On the way up the steps, I heard ooh, ah, and I heard a bang. And as I got up to the top of the steps, I saw Pinklin Thomas. His neck was hanging on the bottom strand. Bone Crusher Smith had dropped him. And it was incredible because a couple of days later, Bone Crusher Smith was in the ring with Tim Witherspoon. And this is how he got the shot with Mike Tyson, how he became the WBA heavyweight champion. When he fought Tim Witherspoon, I was at that fight in Atlantic City, June 15th, 1985. He lost that fight. He lost to Tim Witherspoon. But December 12th, 1986, he defeated Tim Witherspoon in one round. And it was amazing because Tim Witherspoon only lost 2 fights up to that point. He was 25-2. I know he lost to Larry Holmes. But what was crazy about it was Jim Jacobs, I never forget this, and Bill Caton, R.I.P. to these guys. They had a portfolio and a briefcase in their hand. See, Mike Tyson was scheduled to fight Tim Witherspoon next. He had already defeated Trevor Berbick. He was at Madison Square Garden. I was in the second row of that fight. And I was watching these guys as it happened. Jim Jacobs stood up with his hands on his waist when Tim Witherspoon went down the first time. And, he was shaking his head. He had his mouth open. He couldn't understand what was happening. And when the fight was over, after 3 knockdowns, you can see Bill Caton. He had his briefcase. He threw it on the ground. And he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His face was turning red. Because the schedule changed. That was a big money fight for Tyson with Tim Witherspoon. Bone Crusher Smith wasn't even thought of. But he was a last-minute replacement, and that messed up the monopoly of the entire deck. And when he came in as a last-minute replacement, he struck gold. And now Mike Tyson had to face Bone Crusher Smith. It was the WBC and the WBA unification match. Now, that was a great card. Don't get me wrong. Although it was a first-round knockout between Bone Crusher Smith and Tim Witherspoon, it was a great card. You also had Julio Cesar Chavez and Juan Laporte. That was a fantastic fight. Beautiful fight. It went the distance. And you also had Tyrell Biggs and Ronaldo Mr. Snipes. That was a very good fight. I remember when Biggs dropped Snipes with a beautiful straight right hand. But Bone Crusher Smith, to get back to him for a moment, I remember I believe it was November 9th, 1984, he had faced Larry Holmes for the IBF Heavyweight Championship belt. Now, that belt, that was the first time that belt had been displayed because that's when a new government body took over. You had Robert W. Lee. He was the president of that organization. And Larry Holmes had left the WBC, and he was fighting for the IBF belt along with Bone Crusher Smith. This is in, I believe it was November 9th, 1984. This was in Las Vegas. And so Bone Crusher Smith had a lot of opportunities. He was a college graduate. He had a degree. And then he decided to get into boxing. I don't believe he had any amateur experience. But Bone Crusher Smith, I knew him very well personally. He was from Magnolia, South Carolina. Nice guy. We had a lot of conversations together, but he was just there. You know, he wasn't really a fighter. He was a good, he was strong and powerful and knew how to handle himself. But he found an opportunity, let's put it that way. You know, he found an opportunity to get out of corporate and he found boxing, and it paid out for him. So right now we're looking at Bone Crusher Smith and Iron Mike Tyson. Try and give you a better angle here. Once again, you have Mike Tyson and Bone Crusher Smith. Now, the referee for the Bone Crusher Smith and Terrible Tim Witherspoon fight was a guy by the name of Tony Perez. And he made the claim that the 3 knockdown rule was in effect. They didn't know it was in effect. This happened at the last second when they decided to put that in. Because had it been in effect, Tim Witherspoon possibly could have continued fighting. But there were claims that Tim Witherspoon wanted out of Don King's contract, and he knew the only way out of the contract was to no longer be champion. Now, I spoke to Tim Witherspoon several times. We never talked about that issue. I didn't bring it up to him. He didn't bring it up to me, and I left it that way. But that was always the claim, that Tim Witherspoon supposedly threw the fight because he wanted to get out of the contract with Don King. And he knew the only way to get out of the contract with Don King is to no longer be champion. So those facts remain unclaimed. I'm just giving you an overhead view of the scrapbook, trying to get both pages in here at the same time. Now, if you look at Mike Tyson's free hand, he's using his free hand. And he's going to go over the top, and he's going to land on Bone Crusher Smith's left eye. Now, that's not how Bone Crusher Smith got the cut. He got it through a headbutt. And the reason why he got it through a headbutt, I'm going to show you why in a moment. All right, once again, this is an overhead view. Now, right here, as you can see these two men looking at one another as the bell rings. Now, Mike Tyson throws a kiss at Bone Crusher Smith. Bone Crusher Smith didn't like it. So he starts to grab and hold Mike Tyson. He was shoving him by the shoulders and everything else. Mike Tyson begins to headbutt Bone Crusher Smith. And that's why he suffered that cut over the eye. Now, this was one of the most boring 15-round bouts since Tommy Gibbons fought Jack Dempsey. In Shelby, Montana. I'm just trying to clear this for you. All right, Mike Tyson refused to be held back. 2 titles down, 1 to go. So what they're telling you is that Mike Tyson had won the title from James Bone Crusher Smith and went the distance. Very boring fight. And at some point, Bone Crusher Smith decided this is worth a payday and nothing more. Mills Lane is the referee. And Mike Tyson now owns the WBA and the WBC heavyweight championship belt. So Bone Crusher Smith, who was the WBA heavyweight champion, Mike Tyson was the WBC heavyweight champion, now owns both. And he's going to be fighting Pinklin Thomas. Non-title fight. He's waiting to see what happens. Between Tony Tucker and James Buster Douglas for the IBF Heavyweight Championship belt. And that belt was vacant because Michael Spinks was stripped. Outside of the tournament, he decided to fight Jerry Cooney, and he was stripped for not defending his title on time. That was Michael Spinks' way out. I mean, that's just my opinion personally. He didn't want to have to deal with Mike Tyson. And he figured he would sit around and get back in because he could. And as you see, Mike Tyson, Pinklin Thomas, I was at this fight as well. And I saw a 7-round destruction of Pinklin Thomas. Very good combination thrown by Mike Tyson. But with a trained eye, you can tell whether or not a fighter is starting to get too comfortable and facing distractions. And that's what started to happen with Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson and Pinklin Thomas get it on for 7 rounds. And it was a brutal fight between Mike Tyson and Pinklin Thomas. Very good combinations thrown. But you can see some distractions starting to prevail in Mike Tyson's career. Beautiful left hook to the chin. I believe that's what did Pinklin Thomas in. He would eventually go down and out. Now, I told you all the newspapers my dad and I used to collect. We had almost all the newspapers of Mike Tyson, all of them, and we would try and get them in books. But I want to show you something right here. You didn't hear this from me. You see this picture here, how it's torn in the middle there. Well, I got to the point where I used to go to the back of the libraries, doctor's office, dentist's office, any Sports Illustrated, any Boxing Illustrated. Put it this way, I knew of a person who tore any boxing picture, anything that's in those magazines. They would tear them out, put a coat over it, tear them out, and fold it and put it in their pocket, go home and put them in books. I knew of a person who did that. And that's the situation here. How I got it, I couldn't tell you how I got that, but I knew of a person who did that. So here you have Angelo Dundee, Pinklin Thomas, Carlos Padilla. His claim to fame was the Thriller in Manila in 1975 between Muhammad Ali and Smoking Joe Frazier. All right, so next you had Tony Tucker. Tony Tucker was a very, very good fighter. He was part of that 1980 Olympic team. Wound up going to Russia, And he was a very, very good fighter, very good heavyweight. I knew him and his father pretty well. And as you can see here, he had 10 fights with 10 knockouts. Very good heavyweight. He would wind up beating James Buster Douglas for the elimination belt of the IBF because Michael Spinks was stripped of that belt. He went on to fight Jerry Cooney and they stripped him. And the belt was now vacant. So Tony Tucker and James Buster Douglas have fought for that belt. Douglas quit on the ropes. Tucker became heavyweight champion. And now he had to face Mike Tyson, who owned the WBA and the WBC heavyweight championship belt. They were going to unify it. And that's where we are right now. I was at this fight between Tony Tucker and Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson, it seemed like his mind was not in the fight. He was having problems with Robin Givens at this point. He was having problems with his management team, Bill Caton, and Don King. Everybody was trying to steal money from him. Mine wasn't in it. He was all into Robin Givens. In the second round, he wound up getting hit with an uppercut, and it backed him up. And he was having problems. It wound up going the distance. And he wound up opened up on Tony Tucker, but the round had expired. 15th round had expired. They were going 15 round in those days. And Mike Tyson would now own all 3 belts. And he was now the unified heavyweight champion. But he was not undisputed because Michael Spinks was stripped. And he had to get a hold of Michael Spinks in order to become the disputed heavyweight champion. But in the meanwhile, he'd be satisfied with unifying the division. So now Mike Tyson's going to face Tyrell Biggs. Tyrell Biggs was the 1984 super heavyweight champion. He was a very good fighter out of Philadelphia. They would consider him the next Muhammad Ali. And unfortunately for Tyrell Biggs, he came around at a time when Mike Tyson was dominating the division. Now, Mike Tyson would be a good money fight for him, but it wouldn't assure him he would get the belt. And the Duvers in main event figured this would be a very good payday because they didn't give Tyrell Biggs a chance. You know, that was their own fighter, but they wanted to make sure they can get as much money through that fight out of Tyrell Biggs as they possibly could. So Mike Tyson and Tyrell Biggs will get it on. I was at this fight as well. It lasted 7 rounds, but Mike Tyson took charge from the opening bell. Now, they tried to hype and promote this fight as best they could. They would show you all the analytics as to how this fight could be competitive. And they were trying to build it up as Muhammad Ali and Smoking Joe Frazier, and they were doing everything they could to try and make as much money out of this fight as they possibly could, because they knew deep in their hearts that Tyrell Biggs wouldn't be in that ring too long. He would be in the ring as long as Mike Tyson allowed him to be in that ring. And that's pretty much what wound up happening. So you have here Tyrell Biggs and Mike Tyson. Now take a look at Mike Tyson for one moment. He takes charge immediately. He shoots a jab to the chest and to the chin of Tyrell Biggs. He tries to keep him on his back foot as much as possible. He stays low and he tries to lean forward with all his shots. Tyrell Biggs has problems with that because he's a long-ranging fighter. And he tries to move on Mike Tyson, but Mike Tyson stays in his chest the majority of the fight. Beautiful left hook thrown by Mike Tyson. And this is pretty much the end of the fight. It lasted 7 rounds, but the fight would go like this throughout the remainder of that fight. Trying to give you all the shots of the book as I can. Now here you can see from the previous shot, the left hook. That's what drives Tyrell Biggs back to the ropes. And Mike Tyson consistently puts pressure. He applies pressure on Tyrell Biggs. He can't handle the pressure. It's what the issue is with Tyrell Biggs. And here you see a fighter by the name of Tony Orlando. I knew him personally. And, you know, they were wearing what was called a cam, a dash cam at that time, and they would have it in their chest. You can see the open button. There's a little camera in there. And they can get a bird's eye view when they try to go back to the fight. In case you try to go to arbitration with them for a stoppage, they can kind of show you through the eyes of the referee what he saw and why he decided to stop the fight. Now, Tony Orlando didn't want to stop the fight. He looked over at the Duva corner. Guys, what you want me to do? And Tyrell Biggs, he took a beating. He wound up getting dropped. Mike Tyson was on top of him. And he had to stop the fight. So that fight was stopped in the 7th round. Now, like I told you, I was at this fight. I was sitting not too far from where this happened. The commissioner over here, he was yelling at the Duvers, get off the apron or I'm stopping the fight. And they wound up stopping it in the 7th round. Beautiful jab by Mike Tyson. Very, very good left jab. He was out jabbing Tyrell Biggs, and that was a surprise to many. Constantly with the left hand, just poking him backwards so he can go backwards. And he was trying to get him up against the ropes. And he wound up hitting him with a beautiful left hook and Biggs goes down. Tyson almost falls on top of him. That fight was over. Had to be stopped. Tony Orlando has to pull Mike Tyson off of Terrell Biggs, because Biggs would have gotten killed at some point. He was getting caught flush, bleeding badly, and that was about it for him. He was given as many chances and opportunities as he possibly could be given. And I remember George Benton telling him, if you don't have any legs, fight him on the inside. They knew that fight was over at that point, because the only chance that Biggs had was to box and move around. And Tyson wasn't going to let that happen too long, and it was stopped in the 7th round. Biggs had no more legs. It was a matter of just getting hit clean and it was over with. So this was considered the butcher job. And this was one of many newspapers that we had, and we were just pasting them inside the books. And this is a historical look at what happened in 1987. Tyson knocks out or TKOs Biggs in the 7th to keep the crown. So Tyson had all 3 belts at this point in time, but he was not undisputed. He unified the title, but he wasn't undisputed. Michael Spinks had to fight Mike Tyson in order to make that happen. And they were trying desperately to get Spinks into the ring, and he was just looking at the landscape, counting dollars. Tried to avoid getting in that ring with Mike Tyson. Hopefully he got picked off and he could fight someone else, but didn't happen. So what Spinks was waiting for, he found out that Larry Holmes got a shot, and he was hoping that Holmes defeated Tyson so he can have a 3rd fight with Larry Holmes. That's what he was hoping for. Now here you have Michael Katz. I remember Michael Katz. He had some confrontation with Michael Marley. Shortly after that, Michael Katz was wearing a neck brace for the remainder of his journalist career. I don't know how that neck brace got on his neck, but I know there was a confrontation, and I'll leave it at that. So this is a Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. I'm going to leave it off with this. We'll continue with Mike Tyson and Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson and Michael Spinks, and probably a 3rd fight. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Salute.